Good afternoon and welcome to this next session of Calico Online. Today we're talking about recruiting and retaining legal talent and the priority that flexible working might take in those discussions, and the skills that lawyers will need to develop to support their legal careers, the new ways of working, and of course the skills that will increase the performance of your law firm overall. Firstly, some admin on how the session works. Please remain on mute unless you're presenting or obviously joining us for the chat and discussion afterwards. If you want to ask any questions, we really do enjoy some interaction with the audience, and any questions you have, just use the chat function to everybody or just to me as you want to. We will be using some poll questions today to gauge what's happening in your firm on this topic. Rest assured the responses are anonymous. It just gives us a really good idea on what law firms are planning in the realms of flexible working moving forward. The Zoom session will be left open after the formal close at 3 o'clock for any questions to the speakers or chat amongst yourselves on this topic. So for anyone who's new to Calico or new to these webinars, our purpose is to share our knowledge and business know-how from the collaboration of hand-picked suppliers to the legal sector. I'm the founder of Calico. My name is Pauline Freegard, and I also own a marketing agency called Inc Legal. I've had 20 years in this sector doing legal tech, marketing, sales and consulting. And I do help law firms with business consultancy and legal tech. So seeing actually a lot of demand for HR systems right now. So if your firm needs any help with that, give me a shout. But in terms of who we are as a group, we have our membership tree with all our contact details, and what we do is available on the website. A more knowledgeable group of people you will not find. They can help your firm with pretty much everything a law firm needs, from funding, finance, options, marketing and legal news services, telecoms and communications, people development and strategy, all about documents. So typing and dictating them, scanning your incoming post, to organising and bundling your case file electronically, outsourcing your cashiering, to even finding out who in your area is getting all the conveyancing work. And lastly, but definitely not least, ensuring your firm has the most appropriate and best value professional indemnity insurance. So do check out the members list on the website, and obviously you'll find them all linked from all their articles and guides that we have in the library. I think we're up to about 200 now, you said this morning, Peter. So there's a huge knowledge resource there on all these different topics. You can just go and browse as you need to. So just a shout out and a date for your diary for next month. Following on from this topic discussion, actually, how to manage the remote teams effectively. It's something new for many team managers, but something that we all have to get used to moving forward. So Nicola Hodges is the Managing Director of Hedges Law. They've got a fascinating history of 232 years, from a very traditional law firm, as you can imagine, right through to a distributed team, all working in the cloud. And the challenges and changes that they've gone through to achieve that with Nicola. She'll be taking us through that journey and how she's managing her remote legal teams. We'll also be joined by Victor Lizowski from Matrix 247 on the telecoms and comms challenges around the remote team setup, and also from Document Direct and Cashroom, whose businesses are all built around managing distributed teams, dealing with very sensitive information. So that's all relevant to next month's webinar. So I hope you'll be back next month for a follow-on topic to what we talk about today. We do have some exclusive resources for anyone who attends our webinars from the key partners. So have a look at the link. We'll be sending you an email later with some follow-up information and a link to this page on the website. You can't browse to it, it's just for you who's attended. Well worth having a look at. Do take them up on some of the offers and resources there to help your firm. But rest assured, there'll be no hard sales follow-up. We don't allow any kind of hard sales tactics within Calico members, and they wouldn't dream of doing so either. So you can safely take them up on their offer for information and reports without fear of being bombarded with any emails. It'll be useful for your firm. And finally, we'd really like some feedback on today and some ideas for future topics that you would find useful in managing your firm. So look out for the email later. It will have a link to the feedback form, and we'd really appreciate some ideas and feedback from you later. So on to the hot topic of the day. Before you sit back and expect to be presented to for another 40 minutes or so, we'd like some information from you on what your firm is thinking about in terms of that flexible agile working and the challenges you might have to retaining staff and recruiting staff even. So we've set up a couple of polls I'd like to launch now. They are anonymous, so all your responses are completely anonymous, but it would really help us shape the discussion later to find out a bit more about what your firm is thinking. So first of all, the first question is, are you planning on changing working arrangements for your staff? And if yes, what proportion of staff will be offered to work from home in kind of a hybrid arrangement? So I'll launch that one now and we'll see how we go. Okay, about 75% of you have had a vote. That's interesting. And yeah, looks like a really hot topic. I think I can share the results with you. So 80% of you at a firm level are planning on some kind of changing working arrangements for your staff, which is partly probably why you're here this afternoon, to learn from Janet and Joanna. But it does mirror the conversations I've had and many others have had with firms about the changes over the last 12 months and the impact it's going to have on what people want to do. So it looks like 2 to 3 days a week at home office arrangement might be on the cards for many people, which is interesting. Okay, the next one I wanted to ask you was, are there any concerns around staff working at home long term? Any concerns around staff or clients for that matter? Are any of these areas something that you're thinking about in terms of might cause some issues or at least need addressing? Give you a few more seconds. Okay, a few more seconds to answer if you want to. Interesting. So it's really interesting that obviously supervision comes out high on the concerns list, as we would expect for legal work, and the firm culture, which is something that Nicola Poole will be talking about next month, how to retain that working culture and that camaraderie, but also how to perhaps bring on more junior staff when you're actually working remotely much of the time. That firm culture is something that has been a concern for a lot of firms that I've talked to on how you kind of keep that going and how you how you kind of live those values and examples without actually being in the same room or same meetings as your colleagues. That's interesting. Technology and telecoms issues we will talk about next month with Victor. So do join us for that if that is something high on your list. And yeah, so we'll be able to cover much of those things off between Joanna and Joanna on this session. And lastly, what are the benefits you're hoping to gain from offering more flexible working for your staff? Few more seconds. Okay. That's really interesting as well. And it looks like our webinar is absolutely on topic for staff retention. It's something that most people that I've spoken to online have said they want at least some flexibility or some working at home moving forward. I think perhaps it's been a surprise to others in the last 12 months how much they've enjoyed it or how much it actually has reduced the amount of stress they're under in terms of cutting out that commuting time. And also the benefits of actually working from home on something that requires a lot of focus, which lends itself well to obviously the legal work side of things. So staff, not surprised to see staff wellbeing up on that list as well. The recruitment company I've spoken to recently are very busy, and they are getting a lot of people asking for more flexible working options and what the offers are in terms of being able to shape their working week. So it's an interesting change that they've seen as well. Okay, thank you very much for participating in that. We'll move on to the main presentation, and I'm delighted to introduce Janet Cooper, OBE, who will take us through the first part of the session, and I'll leave Janet to introduce herself much better than I ever can. Janet, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pauline, and thanks very much for inviting me back to speak to your members again. We're talking about agile working or flexible working, and it was really helpful to get the feedback on the what you're thinking about agile working, because clearly by the look of it I'm talking to the converted, and that's not always been the case. Offering any form of agile working in the legal profession has been a challenge, but I think going forward I think it's a question of thinking about whether it is a challenge, remains a challenge, or is it an opportunity? And I think it's a really big opportunity going forward. I just want to tell you a little bit about my background so that you can see where I've come from around agile working, and that it really is. There's a strong business case for it. So I started my legal career in a Yorkshire firm, a high street firm, where I did my training, and on qualification I joined Linklaters and became one of the first women partners there. And I pioneered agile working in my team for both men and women. I didn't work part-time or agile myself, but I found it as a really important business strategy to help retain really great lawyers that I didn't want to lose. And I was at Linklaters for 28 years. 10 years ago, I founded another firm. I founded a firm with a specialist area of corporate law, employee and executive share plans. And very quickly, we became one of the top firms in the country in this area. And a key part of that strategy at the beginning was to offer agile working for all, and we were able to recruit really good lawyers from some of the big corporate firms, both locally in Yorkshire where we were based, but also elsewhere as well, that joined us and worked remotely. The firm was 70% women, 70% of the leadership team or thereabouts were women, and we have clients like Unilever, Goldman's and Dell. So really top level clients. The firm won the Queen's Award for Enterprise because it had 50% of its sales were from clients overseas, and continued growth in international sales, all based on agile working and attracting some of the best lawyers to do this work. Some of you may have been on the webinar a few months ago when I talked about an employee ownership trust, because I transferred, or we transferred the business to a trust on behalf of the employees last year, and I've now left the firm. So what I'm going to talk today is about agile working. And by agile, I mean, it means the same thing as flexible, but I think as lawyers, we will know there is a lot in a word, and flexible working has connotations to women and part-time working, whereas agile seems more dynamic and gender neutral. So I prefer to use agile because I think this new way of working is appropriate for both men and women. So what I'm going to talk about today is very briefly the new horizons, kind of what the scene is at the moment, the business case for agile working, in case you get any pushback within your firm, but also to see where the opportunities are, because there are significant opportunities, how to make agile working work, and then post-pandemic, will we return to normal back in the office, or is agile working here to stay? And clearly from that survey, that we've just done, it looks like for many of you it will be here to stay. So looking at new horizons, so we've got the new platform firms like Gunnar Cook, Keystones, and they're offering agile working to experienced lawyers who will have a good opportunity of income from working in the way that they want to work. So we're seeing quite a lot more of that, of these new firms starting up, but also some of the boutiques like mine, where agile working is a key component of working in that firm. There is also pressure for firms to be more inclusive, and certainly for the corporate firms, when you look at the partnership, it's mostly white and it's mostly male. And I think going forward, that's just not going to be acceptable. And particularly as we have more women and more people of diversity taking on senior business roles, they will expect to see it reflected in the professional firms that they're working with. So I think going forward, there'll be more pressure to see that diversity within the law firms themselves. And agile working is a way of helping make that work. And so some firms are already doing it, and we can talk about that. But the pandemic year has clearly shown us we can work from home, we can work in an agile way, and that there is technology available to make it work. So we're going to talk about how much of it will stick. But the business case for agile working, I think, is key here. And that business case is based on making sure that people want to stay in the business. When I was at Linklaters, I was the graduate recruitment partner for a number of years, and our absolute goal, and we have achieved it every year, was to recruit at the graduate level 50-50 men and women to become trainees. But you can see in most of those city firms, by the time it came to partnership, the partnership was about maybe 15-20% women. So something was getting lost along the way, that women chose to leave. And so I first proposed agile working when I was at Linklaters in the early 90s. And if you remember, that's before the internet and mostly before mobile phones. So working in an agile way was far more difficult because we just didn't really have the technology to support it. And the reason I championed it at Linklaters was because I had a really terrific lawyer in my team who needed to, she got herself a job in Cambridge because her husband had got a posting at Cambridge University, and she couldn't travel from Cambridge with 2 children at home. And so she got a job locally, and I really didn't want her to leave. So even though no one else in the firm was working on client work in a part-time way, or certainly not from home, the leadership then said, absolutely, if you want to do it, you make it work, and let's see how it goes. And that lady, that woman, is still at Linklaters 30 years later. So that shows that when you get it right, you do retain the best talent. And I would say she was absolutely the best talent, and she's had a great career, and they've had a really great lawyer in the team looking after the clients. So in terms of the business case for agile working, it's retaining the best people. Start with retention. You don't necessarily have to think about hiring people on an agile basis, but you'll have great people in the team you don't want to lose. And that might be because, maternity or parent care or some other thing that they want to achieve. If they ask for it, think about how you can make it work, because you know what you're working with. And they know your clients and they know your culture. my view has been I'd rather have a super able lawyer working 3 or 4 days a week than one that's not quite so good or quite so committed to clients working 5 days a week. And you do get better retention if you're offering a better way of working to suit more people. Hiring, it can be a big draw for men and women working flexibly. It's not all about childcare. You know, I've had people in my team who have been elite athletes, need to train very early in the morning and come in at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock. I've had people in my team that are, one was a hang glider, number 5 in the UK. So it's not all about childcare. It's about living the life that you want to live and having a great career as well. So you do have a bigger pool of talent to recruit and retain by offering these extra benefits, and rather than losing the talent to the competition. But I think it also does change the culture of the firm as well. Certainly in the smaller firms, you may find that there is more one-on-one client care, one lawyer, one client, or many clients, but you don't necessarily have the team working that's going on. Whereas if you have agile working, you probably do need to work on the team working approach to client care, whatever kind of law that you practice, so that you've got coverage for when they're not there. One of the arguments about agile working is that, well, if people are not there, then they're not looking after their clients. That's not the case, because clearly as a lawyer you'll have other clients to look after, so they're not always there for any one client at any particular time. It's all about team working, communication and client care. So certainly the business case for agile working is people and culture. It does build up a better team working culture if that's what you want. And I think team working does provide better team care as well as client care. It supports knowledge sharing, better communication with the team, better risk management, so you have oversight of each other's matters. One of the things that came up on the survey just now was supervision. If you've got two lawyers on the whole looking after a client, you'll have oversight of each other's work, so you've got a better opportunity of finding things if they're not being looked after or going wrong. And it also gives you better file management. You have to do your filing, even e-filing, or get somebody to do it, so that you can pick it up from each other. So I think it does provide better client care through having the right people, a better culture through team working, and better client care so that you can cover for each other. In my teams, both at Linklaters and in the firm I founded, we had people based in Australia and New Zealand. We did have a global client base, and therefore actually having people in Australia and New Zealand was fantastic, because they could work when we were going home. So it put less pressure on us to stay late, because we knew we could hand over to the lawyers in Australia and New Zealand. So yes, I think it does give you better client care, but the big issue is, does it cost more? Is a duplication, is a wasted office space? I think it's more cost effective having people working on an agile basis. One, you're recruiting less, because I hope you have better retention, so you have less attrition. And we know it costs money to hire people and train them, and then that lost time when they're working their notice. So I think just of the people side, it has a better cost argument for you. There is an argument about surplus space. They're not at their desk all the time, so we've got all the space that we're not effectively using. My suggestion is, if you are having people who are regularly working from home, to desk share or hot desk. Some would say, well, the lawyers like their papers and their folders and the books on the desk. But actually what I have found with people working from home is that they print out a lot less and they use online resources. They don't want all this paperwork at home. So there's no point having it at the office, because they're not there all the time. So I think lawyers do get used to hot desking if they want the benefit of home working as well. There's an argument about it being inefficient having a teamwork on any client, not just one lawyer. But I think if you have a senior and a junior on a matter, you've got some training going on, but you've also got the coverage there as well if one of them's not in the office or not working at that time. So it doesn't have to be efficient, but it is a thing to factor into. One of the arguments, cost arguments against agile working, is too much management time, organising the cover, etc. I think it was properly managed, and there's great training in the team to make sure that you know how it works. This should work out that you're working, that the team who's working in an agile way cover for each other and support each other. It does not need a partner or a director support as well to make sure that the client has the right experience. So it does need some partner oversight to make sure the clients are happy. But on the whole, you should encourage the team to make it work for themselves. There was one, the lady that I mentioned, that was the first home working Fiona at Linklaters. She was doing client work, and some of my colleagues thought it was never going to work. The clients wouldn't wear their lawyer being miles out of the city and available to come to meetings. Fairly early on, they called her to come to a board meeting, and I went in her place. So the client had no, she couldn't come in from Cambridge. The client was not then sent a trainee to cover and would struggle. I covered, and I think that's the thing. If you have a partner commitment behind supporting agile working, particularly the home agile working, and the clients are not disadvantaged by not getting the advice they need when they need it, then it does work. But apart from that, I don't think it requires as much management time as you would think. And one of the other things I've heard around agile working and allowing people to work short hours or reduced hours is that it's difficult to performance management, particularly when they're usually women working in a part-time way, that, you know, if you're performance managing them, it's going to be a sex discrimination claim before you know it. I think the thing there is, if you have a good performance system and you know what good looks like, it doesn't matter whether they're working full hours or reduced hours. You deal with it in the moment and you give honest and fair feedback so that it should not give rise to sex discrimination. And, you know, if you are dumping on somebody that's working part-time and it's not honouring the commitment to work in an agile way, then, you know, there could be issues there. But if you're actually managing it properly, giving work fairly, and performance managing honestly and fairly, that should not be an issue. And certainly I've never had that issue in 30 years. So looking at the next slide, how do you make it work? I think the key things there is for it to be a strategic goal to support agile working. It only works if it comes from the top, that the partners want it and they're there to support it. And don't treat people who are doing this reduced work, reduced hours, or working from home as second-class citizens, or allocate them less attractive work, or assume they don't want promotion or they're not ambitious. Treat them fairly and ask them, and how can you support their career in law? Because sometimes they might want to take the foot off the gas in terms of promotion, but other times they want to come back. So don't make any assumptions. Just treat them openly and fairly. And be clear on the basis of your agile working and be fair and consistent with it. And in my view, that doesn't necessarily mean offering the same agile arrangement for all, whether that's reduced hours or home working, but it's having a clear policy about where it can work and how you're going to let that roll out in the firm. So does it need to be firm-wide? Probably not. Certainly at Linklaters it wasn't. And not all practice areas would suit full agile working, especially if you have to go to court every day and court resumes back into physical appearances, or you have a certain client base where they come into you rather than having Zoom meetings. So you've got to think through how it's going to work. But I think it can work, but you've got to have a clear policy about where it can work and think it through, and don't put up unnecessary barriers, because if you want retention and you want to hire from a broader group of people, then work out where it can work rather than where it can't work. I think one of the big challenges coming forward will be, because we've seen, you know, working from home and working in an agile way does work, will be the compressed hours, where people who are say working 40 hours a week want to do those 40 hours in a 4-day week, and that you have to have that coverage for that one working day when they're not working. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges coming forward, where you're not working the kind of 30 hours, 50 hours, but they want to work their 40 hours in a 4-day week. That of itself is agile working. It's not reduced hours and it's not necessarily home working, but it's actually having more flexibility to have a day off in the week when they can do something else. But I think the key thing to make it work is to be consistent and to be fair. And I think to some extent agile working needs to work on both sides, that you're being fair and consistent and so are they, and if they're not, to have conversations early about it. And then technology, the third point, to have technology to support it. Certainly my firm was based in the cloud from the outset, and we had Slack very early and we had Zoom before we had the lockdown. And I think having those the technology to support agile working and home working is absolutely critical, and to stay on top of the technology, because more technology will come available to make working remotely easier, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that on the next webinar. And then get the language right. I've already talked about why I keep using the word agile rather than flexible. I think it does make a difference so that people feel that they're all part of the team. It's not about being less committed. And so in my firm, we didn't have the term part-time either. We had agreed hours. So it wasn't even part-time or full-time, it was agreed hours. And the starting point was 40 hours, but it could be 30, it could be 25, whatever that was what we said, agreed hours. And then finally, training, and we're just going to come on to Joanna shortly, but I think sometimes to get agile working well, where you've got the leadership strategic view that we want it, and that you've got the technology to support it, then is the team ready for it? And you might need to look at things like time management, are they using the time effectively, recognizing each other's time availability and planning ahead. I certainly brought that into my team a couple of years ago, because we saw that there was some kind of pinch points about people not planning for each other's time. Communications, that might be a consideration to make sure people are communicating effectively with each other. And team working, and what good team working looks like in your firm. So just going on to, will agile working stick, the new horizons? I think there will be agile working, and we could see that from the survey at the beginning of this session today. It is here to stay. We can see that it works. The question is, how can each law firm support it and support their clients? You'll need to consider what your competitors are doing, and that could be other firms like you, but it could also be the big law firms as well, because I think they will come back and offer more agile working in a way that they've never done before, including some home working, which will mean some people can work quite a long way out of the city and just come into the office 1 or 2 days a week or a fortnight when necessary. So you'll be competing with those firms regionally as well. Do think about being more inclusive and how that's going to look, and what agile working can do to support that initiative. And be clear, consistent with your employment policies and your performance management. And I think you will see the opportunity about offering agile working.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. That's fascinating and benefit of many years of doing this, and which is quite new for some firms. So anyone who has any questions, Janet will be here with us at the end to answer any more specific questions that you might have on this area. Very pleased now to introduce Joanna Gaudoin from Inside Out Image, and she is one of our Calico associates, having joined just recently. And I think the mix of the skills plus the agile flexible working, whichever you want to call it, is actually a really crucial thing, because it is a completely different way of interacting and managing a team, which we'll talk about more next month as well. So Joanna, very pleased to introduce you.
Thank you very much, both Janet and Pauline. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I now know I'm preaching to the converted, because I was going to start by saying that, of course, as you know, retaining and attracting good people is absolutely key to your firm's success. Loss of great individuals is very costly in terms of recruitment, the financial cost, but also the time, and then time to upskill, embed people in the firm, and potentially effects on, of course, client relationships. But from that poll we did earlier, I could see that 100% of you, which is amazing, are very keen to harness the benefit through agile working of retention. So I know I don't need to say much more on that. Just to briefly introduce myself, as Janet did, if I can move the slide on, just if I can get that to move, which I can't. There we go. No.
Do you want me to?
Pauline, you may have to move it on for me. Sorry.
Right.
We thought I had rights to do it. Apologies, everyone. So I'm Joanna Gaudoin. I've run Inside Out Image for a decade now. I previously worked in corporates. Working in the legal sector is one of my areas of expertise. Essentially, what I do is I help really bright technical people work on their non-technical people skills. So that means how they show up, how they come across to other people in every professional scenario, to make sure they are making the best, not only for their own careers, but your firm as well, because when, of course, people are developed in a diverse range of areas, they are going to perform better. And I'll be saying more about that as we go along. So I work with clients individually, a lot of that's privately, although some through firms. I speak at events, and then I also run masterclasses and workshops on a range of events, sorry, a range of topics rather. Thanks very much, Pauline. So what am I seeing? Well, I do see both sides, because I work with individual lawyers to help them with their careers when they've hit barriers. So I've worked with a couple just recently. So one has been looking for a new role. So that's been really interesting, hearing what she's looking for after being made redundant last year due to COVID. And I'm working with a law firm partner at the moment who's within a firm that's just gone through a merger. So there's a variety of topics we are tackling there. But what I am seeing from my individual client base is what they're wanting from their firms is firstly flexibility. And I have used flexibility rather than agile. I completely support what Janet said about the use of the word flexibility, but here I mean in a more general sense. So flexibility in terms of how they work, but in other elements too. Secondly, diversity. So people are now looking for a bit more from their firms. They're looking at firms who want to have more women in senior positions, who are looking at the overall diversity of their firm. So from an ethnic background perspective as well. So that's a second very important one. And thirdly, career progression. So firms that are keen on actively looking at this. So not just plonking someone in a role and, you know, they move up through associate, senior associate, etc., but actually firms that are a bit more proactive on that front of progressing their careers and giving them the right tools that they need to do that. So that is what I'm seeing from individuals. And if we move on to the next slide, there's what I'm seeing from the law firms I work with as well. And the first point is about their lawyers having a broader range of skills, even at more junior levels. And the point here is that the earlier you can get your individuals up to speed on a range of skills, and not just the legal technical skills, but the other more people-based skills, the easier it will be for them to learn. It becomes embedded at, dare I say, a younger age as well as younger experience. And it means you've got more people able to do the heavy lifting in the firm. So as they're interacting with clients, that increases the engagement and the views, the reputation of your firm, so helping to retain them and hopefully increase the client value, so they'll bring more work to you. You know, for instance, if you've got a private client, that might initially start just with their private business, but then maybe they've got a business as well. So you can bring in your corporate side. So trying to get more from the clients you've got, because of course that's a lot easier than winning completely new clients. But then of course having more people in the firm who can attract new clients and build relationships with potential clients. So I have seen many firms who are perhaps reliant, dare I say, on maybe one or two key partners, to do those latter two things, so to own the relationships and to bring in new relationships. And there's a danger there, of course, of if those partners leave, if they come to retirement or they move on, then you're at strong risk, despite any covenants, of losing some clients. So the more spread you can make that amongst your firm, and also get your lawyers engaging at different levels. So maybe you've got a big corporate client, and yes, the partner leads the relationship and has the senior conversations with the client, but maybe you've got more junior lawyers that can interact with more junior people on the client side. So you're just embedding and putting down further roots within those clients. So I'd always advocate trying to start these skills as early as you can, because what happens a lot of the time I see, and very often this is where I gain private clients actually, is lawyers have maybe been promoted into a role but actually not equipped with the skills they need to do that role, because the day job has changed what they're actually meant to be doing. And the skills I work with people on, I have to admit, few lawyers are innately good at. They're usually good at them if they've had a great role model, perhaps, or they have had some development from somebody else. So that's an important consideration. And I think that becomes even more of a consideration in an agile working environment, because perhaps there's going to be less opportunity to witness how your more senior staff operate, and for more junior staff to learn from that. And I think that's a key consideration when thinking about how the agile working is going to look. So my focus this afternoon, I'm going to come on to some key skill areas in a minute, is really where these two intersect, and looking at the development of your lawyers and how to map their careers, so that it not only benefits the individuals and they feel like they've got a plan, they can move forward, but your firm as well, in terms of both retaining them, but also that you've got more lawyers with more rounded skill sets. So that is going to be my focus that I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 10 minutes. So if we move on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk through some skills. So I'm going to have sent out to you via the Calico email later. You will get a reference guide to these. So take some notes if you would like, but there's actually a page on each of these skills in the guide that you'll be able to download. So it's a completely free guide that you'll get sent the link to. But I'm going to talk through, for the most part, probably 5 of them we've probably got time for today, but I'm just going to talk about them all very briefly first. So if we go from the top left, the first one I've got is personal impact, and I'm going to come back to that one, so I won't dwell on it. The second one is office politics, so how to navigate that. Not going to go into that detail today, but office politics usually generates a lot of negativity when you hear that term. It doesn't have to be negative, but all I'll say is office politics occurs pretty much in every environment, because where you've got different people with different values, assumptions, beliefs, that can become rife and it can become very negative. And I'd say that's definitely something to think about as you move into more agile working. It's interesting to think that during the last year, there's been 2 attitudes that I've seen develop. One is office politics has gone away. And that's just because people haven't had to physically go to the office and see the people that usually generate those negative feelings in them, negative behaviors. And then the other extreme is people that have become very paranoid and thought it's got worse because they can't actually see what's going on, and they're making all these assumptions about side conversations going on that may not be the reality. So I'd say that's a big watch out for agile working. Top right is client and prospect relationships. I'm going to come back to that one. Middle left is networking skills, also coming back to that, as I'm going to do with the middle one, which is internal strategic relationships. Middle right is managing a team, and this is something that is a big pit to fall into unless you're really careful. So when you promote somebody, they're a great lawyer, great at their job, but that doesn't mean they're great at managing a team of lawyers. That's a totally different game. So it really needs a lot of thought before you've promoted the person, ideally, to make sure they can hit the ground running, and there's not a period of stagnation whilst they upskill in that role. It's not to say you can't learn any of that on the job, but it's much better if people have had some support to develop those skills. Bottom left is effective meetings, so making sure people come across well in meetings and can influence others, whether that be clients or colleagues, for example. Bottom middle is presenting, so similarly to make sure people are effective presenters, that as a result of them talking through some information, whether that be a formal PowerPoint or more informal information, that the people receiving the information know, think, do, believe, or act differently as a result, because if they don't, what on earth is the point? Bottom right is feedback and responding to that, and that's one of the ones I'm going to talk through in slightly more detail in a minute. So let's start with personal impact. Sorry, if we can stay on that slide, Pauline. Thanks a lot. That's great. So top left, just staying on personal impact. I've spoken for a lot of firms on this area. Typically, I talk about personal impact involving 3 tools. So our appearance, our body language, and our voice. Now, clearly, on a video call, we are far more limited in those tools than we are in person. You can see a very limited amount of me right now. You probably can't even see my hands. I am gesticulating, but you probably cannot tell that at all. So we do lose tools when we're working virtually. So that's an important aspect to consider. I know there's a webinar next month about working remotely, but certainly getting people to think about how do they come across in different professional scenarios. Do they represent themselves and your firm well? And that does need thought, and I think everybody's evolved with that during the last year. You know, people that a year ago were maybe having to sit on the end of their bed, perching their laptop on their knees, have hopefully found a better scenario for that. It's going to be interesting ongoing, I think, what happens to the appearance dress code aspect. I do think it's going to relax even more than it had started to do before we had the lockdown, but I think that's watch this space. It's going to be very interesting. But fundamentally, making sure your team are cognizant of the fact that they are not only representing themselves but your firm. How do you want them to come across? You know, it doesn't mean dictating to them what they should wear, what they shouldn't wear, but just getting them to think about they're representing themselves, their brand, and yours, and how can they do that to optimize their chances of getting known, liked, and trusted amongst your client base, but also prospective clients and, of course, colleagues. The second one I'm going to talk about is top right in a bit more detail. So building on the personal impact, which of course is foundational to most of the other things I'm covering, but thinking about those client and prospect relationships. How good are your people at building rapport? Really thinking about that in a genuine way. Of course, the performance matters. Of course, they need to do a good legal job. But the more they can build rapport with your clients, the more likely they are to stay, to tell other people about your firm, the better your people can meet their needs, to understand the spoken elements that your clients say and articulate, as well as the unspoken. So that means a bit of bespoke thinking about in terms of how do we best service our clients. So yes, you can have overall processes and policies, but actually individuals need to be able to engage with people really well and fundamentally deal with them as well when there's difficult situations. And it's a lot easier to deal with difficult situations with clients if there's a really positive relationship in the first place. A client that's dissatisfied is far more likely to stay low on the anger scale if they like and trust you and your firm more in the first place. So really having people thinking about that and how good they are at generating those relationships. And linked to that, middle left, I've run a lot of workshops for firms on networking. Jolson Law was the most recent one I think I did. I've done a couple of things for them. And yeah, it's making sure you've got this good variety of people that can go out and network. And networking has changed in the last year. It's all gone online. I have to admit to not being a big fan personally of online. There's a lot of benefits to it. It enables people to attend that wouldn't normally be able to attend, perhaps. It enables us to connect with people in different geographies. But it's going to be interesting to see over the next year, especially with agile working, of what's going to happen to that. People will probably be more selective about the events they will go to in person, but making sure you have got lawyers who are confident to go to those both type of events, whether they be online or in person. If any of you have heard me speak on this topic before, it's not my phrase, but you will have heard me say you cannot build a network when you need one. So this is one of the key reasons why the younger you can get your lawyers working on these skills and getting used to it, and that might involve, you know, having some people internally mentor them and support them through this, helping them have a strategy and a plan, as well as the skills to network confidently, and that being everything from preparing to going networking to actually going to the event and doing something afterwards, because fundamentally you can have a load of lawyers ticking the box they went to a nice canapé and wine event but getting absolutely nothing from it. And yeah, probably they hated every minute of it. It's only the wine and canapes that got them through. They've ticked the box, but your firm's got nothing, and they probably paid membership fees to go to that. So making sure your people understand the benefits and they're equipped to go to such events, whether they be on or offline. The middle one's quite an interesting one that I wanted to cover, and this is about internal strategic relationships. And from an individual perspective, I talk to clients about this a lot in terms of building their careers. It's important they're known more widely in their firm than just by their immediate colleagues. And where I see actually the most negative office politics occurring is with more senior stakeholders who aren't their immediate boss or responsible partner. And it's fundamentally usually because there's not a relationship there. It hasn't been built. So there are many benefits of working on those relationships, making sure your lawyers are confident about talking to other people in the practice. It helps them build their knowledge, but also helps them deal with clients better, to offer better client care. Because if there's something else they think a client could be helped with, then of course they're confident to bring in other people from your firm, from other parts of the practice, of course, generate more cross-selling opportunities, helping the performance there. So really thinking about how you can have that in your culture, that's encouraged. People aren't afraid to go and talk to other people outside their direct area. So lots of benefits there for individuals and your firm. And bottom right is dealing with feedback. Now, I think if any of us think about getting feedback, usually it means it's got something about improvement implied in it. We probably don't like it very much, if we're brutally honest, but it helps all of us develop and move forward. So creating a culture where people are getting regular feedback, they're not just, as I usually find, waiting till their annual review and then worrying about it then. They're actively finding ways to seek it out in an appropriate way throughout the year, to make sure they're clear on what it really means, not what they think it means, and taking it forward so that actually they can develop, grow, it supports their progression. And I'm about to run again a bespoke session on constructive feedback for one of the very big law firms. I'm not allowed to give their name. They're mainly in the B2B space, and that's about getting people to really utilize the process that's there formally, but to think about how they can get more informal feedback to move forward. And I think with agile working, that is something that needs a bit more thought as well, much like all these points, because there aren't going to be perhaps so many opportunities for casual conversations. So all of these skills I'm talking about here need a bit more intent to actually make sure they happen. So I hope that gives you a good idea of those 9 skills. And as I say, you will receive the link to download the guide for that. And if you've got any questions, you can get in touch with me. Before I wrap up, I'm just going to run our final poll for today. And I'd love to know from those skills I've just talked through, again, this is anonymous, you can pick multiple answers. Which of those do you recognise you could do with upping in your firm? Doesn't mean you're going to get some email from me advertising a workshop. It's just always really interesting to see the spread of skills that people are thinking about. So there's the 9 skills there. I realise you might need a minute or two to look at this because it needs a bit more thought perhaps. But just thinking about, you know, where are you at with these different skills? And you could use my guide actually to work through them and almost give your firm a score. And then the ones that are lowest, prioritize those and think about, how do you fill that gap? Yes, you could bring in an expert, but are there other ways? Can you use internal resources as well to help to upskill your people? Great, so that's about 50% of you have voted. So it'd be lovely if the other 50% wanted to put their 2 pence in. Just give you a few more seconds to do that. Okay, 5 more seconds. It does require thought. Don't overthink it too much would be my advice. Lovely. I'm going to end the polling now. Thank you. Share the results with you. So let's see what we've got. So managing a team effectively, that's really interesting, 67%. Yeah, really, really important one, because if you've got someone coming promoted into a role, maybe into partner position, and they've never managed people before, there's a whole load of other elements they have to manage there, and they're responsible fundamentally for the productivity and performance, well-being, happiness of all those people underneath them. So it is a really key skill to get right, and you can't just assume because they're a good lawyer they'll be good at that. Then it looks like we've got a couple on 50%, so building relationships with clients and prospects, and networking to get results. So those two obviously have a link. So thank you very much for sharing your views on that. Pauline, could you just move on to the final slide for me? Thank you. So if you've got any questions, I, like Janet, am going to hang around to take those. Janet talked about communication, time management, all those elements. So anything you want to ask about those, the specific skills I've talked about, the frameworks Janet gave you for things to consider. And then 3 options. So you're going to get this guide sent to you, just download it as a link. If you want more regular communications from me, you'll find how to do that on my website. Do connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like to, and if I can help you with anything, whether it's next week or in 2 months, you have a question, just send me an email. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Really informative, and some really interesting responses on the polls as well today. Very informative to see that people have the same kind of concerns or questions and areas of things to work on, which hopefully will be a reassurance as well as prompting some focus on those areas too. So I'm going to close the formal session now, but we'll leave the room open for any questions in person, so you can unmute and ask Janet or Joanna any questions, or myself, on this topic. And we will hopefully see you next time for the follow-up session on managing those remote teams. But for now, that's the end of the formal session.